All right, another night of learning about public speaking. Isn't that exciting, right? We're going to learn and grow. So let's go ahead and get the screen share going here and get everything in process. Okay, so we're continuing our journey to becoming competent and confident speakers by learning how to prepare a speech. We're still focused on the first step, which is creating content, learning how to write a speech. So far, we've looked at knowing the big picture, which is the first step in writing a speech. And last time, we began to look at the second step, what you do during the writing process. What's involved in the writing process? Well, it's making an outline, then writing a speech, and lastly, fine-tuning what you wrote. And last time we focused on making an outline. Now, the outline is like blueprints for a building. It gives you the basic structure for creating your speech. It makes you think about what ideas to include and what order to put them in. So for the opening today, we're going to, from what we did last week, the outline, we're moving on now to work on the opening, the body, and the closing. And also traditions. I should say, I'm getting all myself confused up. These are the things we looked at last week, or last time, when we did the outline. We looked at how to do the outline how to use the outline, and how to write the opening, the body, and closing transitions for all that. And today we're moving on to focusing on the opening. Most people would say that you should write the body first, but I really believe you should work on the opening and the closing first. Those are the first things you do. Then that's what I do, is I work on the body of it. Now, the reason I do this is I like to know where I'm starting and where I'm ending before I do the main part of the speech. Then when I get done doing all that, the opening and closing, and then the body, after I get that body done, I go back and fine tune the opening and closing. But a lot of people will say, just do the body and then work on your opening and closing. So whatever works best for you. Now, how do you get off to the best start possible when you start speaking, when you start your opening? Okay. Well, the first thing you want to do is grab people's attention. Your audience needs to be focused in on you, so you need to really do something to get them to pay attention. There's a lot of things going on, their phones and all this, so you want something that's really good at getting their attention. And also, you want to create interest. You want to say, oh, this sounds interesting. This is something I want to pay attention to. Now, to do this, you could share quotes, startling statistics, stories, humor of some sort. And so these are the things that will help draw in people when you start. So the other thing you can do while you're in this part is you can help set up the problem that you're going to provide the solution to later. After you grab their attention and create some interest, you can then establish what you're going to talk about and your core message. Get that established too. And the last thing you want to answer, the question you want to answer in your opening is, explain why they should listen to you. What's in it for them? What will your solution do for them? Now, what I want to do tonight is share with you a few examples from my speech that I did for Project 2 from the old Competent Communication Manual. And last week, I used it to go over the outline, to give examples of the outline. So here it is, Project 2. Now, I think this was like, oh geez, when was this? 2013 or so several years ago. All right. Now, here is what I wrote for the very first part of my opening. All of us have a variety of fears that control us in one way or another. Correct? Me, I have a fear of heights. So I don't like to climb up on tall ladders or jump off 3-meter diving boards or anything like that. Freaks me out. Okay? Why is it that fears control us so much? They affect our relationships, our peace of mind, and they prevent us from reaching our full potential. And that's not good. Now, think about the fears you have and how they control you. Raise your hand if you would like to experience victory over your fears. Okay, don't be afraid, raise your hand. Okay, good. Now, we'll move on to what I did for a speech contest 5 years later. I took the same speech, adapted it, made changes, because after 5 years, I look at things a little different, as you would. And let's see what changes I made to the opening. Oh, by the way, I will give you PDFs to both of my speeches, the one I did for Project 2 and the one I did for the contest. Because that way you can really, it'd be easier to compare them than it's going to be here. So let's look at the opening there. Recently, I read a quote about fear that impacted me big time. I wonder how my life would have changed if I had come across this quote when I was in my 20s and had it impact me then as it did now. Now, the quote is by Erwin McManus. He's an author and filmmaker. And here's what he said. He said that our fears establish the limits of our lives. Our fears establish the limits of our lives. Then silence for a bit, look at everybody. Now, many times in my life, I let fear limit me from reaching my potential and experiencing life to the fullest. Have you let fear limit you? Don't be afraid, admit it. Okay? Let's put our hands up again. Okay? Put it up there. Now look around. You see, we're all in this together. So that was the opening for both versions of it. Let's go on now to look at the closing. Now, what do you want? How do you want to close your speech? Well, I think the main thing is that you want to close your speech in a way that makes it compelling and memorable. How do you do that? Well, we're talking only about the words now, but obvious, our delivery, how we use our voice and how we use our body has a big part to do with it as well. But like I said, today we're just focusing on the words. So how do you do that? Well, the first thing you want to do is summarize quickly the main points you want your audience to remember. Then say your core message, restate it, reinforce it, say it in a creative way. And this will help make it memorable. Be sure to also include a call to action. Tell them what you want them to do with what you shared. Then give them a vision of what their lives would look like if they would do the call to action that you asked them to do. Help them to see how this would help their lives. And then the very end of your speech, the last word you say, you want to end on a high note. Say something memorable, powerful, emotional, or humorous. And you can use things like quotes or power statements, short stories, or memorable sayings. When I did the Power of Love speech, I had a statement in there that people come up to me even a year or two later and told me that really stuck with them. And it was this: only love can heal the human heart. So it really can have an impact on people if you come with something that really hits them. So let's move on back to looking at Project 2 from the Competent Communication Manual and look at the closing I did for that speech. In conclusion, I encourage you to remember 3 things. Everyone has fears that control them. You're not alone. Identify your fears and understand why they control you. Then face your fears, and fear will lose its power over you. And then for my ending words, end on a high note, I had a quote from Mel Gibson's character from the movie, William Wallace from the movie Braveheart. Everyone dies, aye, but not everyone truly lives. Do you want to really experience life? Then face your fears and you will truly live. Aye. Mr. Toastmaster. Okay. So let's see how I adapted the closing of the speech for the speech contest 5 years later. I changed it quite a bit. And so here's what I said. Looking back over my experiences, here's my encouragement to you. Do not let fear limit you. Do not let fear limit you. Be courageous. Choose one fear that really limits you. Face that fear. Go through that fear again and again until you defeat that fear. If you do, you will expand the limits of your lives in ways you could never have imagined, reaching more of your potential, experiencing life to the fullest, and being able to say, I did it. Now you have to understand, I said I did it. I shared 3 different things I feared and how I overcame them. And after I overcame each one in the speech, I went, I did it. So that's how it connects with that. So let's look at our opening and closing. So let's go on to the body of the speech. Now it's the main part of the speech. It's like the center of a sandwich. It's where the main ideas, the key concepts are discussed. It's the meat. Now the body is made up of main points and subpoints. The main points are the ideas or facts you're going to focus on regarding your topic. You elaborate each main point with subpoints that help to clarify or prove or support each main point. For this one, we'll look again at project 2 as an example of it. Now, this was really hard. Some of, when you get into the details of the speeches, like the full openings, I just didn't want to get into that. So I'm just going to share kind of the outline form with you. Here we go. For the project 2, here's what I did. This is one of the main points was telling a personal story about the fear of heights. And I started talking about climbing this pole and how it started moving and I'd start shaking and it would just drive me, it was unbelievable. And then what happened to me afterwards when I finally made it to the top and stood on top of this 10-meter pole and looked around and how it made me feel. But then afterwards, having gone through, that's an extreme fear of mine, I discovered that other fears didn't have such an impact on me anymore. So that was interesting. And so that's why I discovered that when you face your fears, rather than avoid them, your fear loses its grip over you. So that was for the project 2. Then we go into the speech contest. Oh, by the way, you could see that I got first place. So there you go. Okay. Now let's see how I adapted the same main point and its subpoints for the speech 5 years later. So again, I go over what happened, climbing up the pole and explaining it. I think this time I used a lot more emotion as I shared it. But then I said this at the beginning as I looked up and I said, you know what motivated me to go up? My ego. Because a young lady went before me and I was not going to let her show me up. Me, man, yeah. And so, I described all the things and then I get on top and again, just like before, how many of my lesser fears lost their hold on me. And I realized that the more intense the fear you face, the more you benefit. So that's try to encourage everybody to face the fears that bother them or hold them back the most. So that's our look at the opening and closing, because we're just doing an introduction. And so here's a few, and the body, sorry. But here's some food for thought to consider when you're writing your speech, when you're doing the opening, the closing, and the body, okay? Some food for thought. You want your speech to be clear, concise, and compelling. These are important. Clear, concise, compelling. Clear, it's easy to understand. You're not using words that your audience don't know. And I've seen that happen where people who have technical backgrounds in something, they use words with a non-technical audience that the people are going like, what the heck does that mean? You know? So it has to be clear and easy to understand. And concise, you need to get to the point using simple words, simple phrases, and simple sentences. I learned about this the hard way because I don't know if it was my third or fourth speech in the competent communication manual, but I wrote the speech and it was 14 minutes long when I did it. It had to be 7. And so it was brutal, but I worked long and hard because I was not used to this. I really had to figure out how to make things more concise and use simpler words and simpler phrases and being able to say things in a lot less detail, a lot less words. But what was interesting, when I got done, I did get the speech to 7 minutes, and it was a much better speech. And so I became convinced of the importance of being clear and concise. To be compelling, your logic and your reasoning has to make sense to your audience. If it doesn't, they're not going to buy into it. So in regards to your audience, as far as what you want to accomplish with it, you want to be able to connect with your audience. You need to meet them right where they're at and then take them where you want them to go. This is where knowing your audience comes very helpful. It's actually critical if you really want to learn, if you really want to connect with your audience. Then there's this aspect of that we want our speech to keep our audience engaged. And you do this by using a logical structure that's easy to follow and understand, along with effective transitions. In addition, using stories, asking questions, using humor and props are all good ways to help keep your audience engaged while you're talking. And then, lastly, we want our speech to influence our audiences to change their feelings, to change their thinking, to change their actions. Make sure that your call to action is simple to do. And it's best to only give them one thing to do. If you say to your audience, I've got 25 things for you to do, probably not going to happen. So give them one thing to get started, get simply started. Keep it simple and make it easy to do. And then you're more likely to get people to follow through. Now remember, your goal is to have your audience transform into a better version of themselves in some way because of what you said. Now, how about time? How much time should we spend on the opening, the body, and the closing? And how many words should we speak per minute during a speech? Well, let's look at the time for the opening, the body, and closing first. Now, for the opening, generally it can be 10 to 20%. I've seen it down to 5%, but generally around 10 to 20. And the shorter the speech, the closer it is to 10%. Okay? So a 7-minute speech would be 1 to 1.5 minutes. This is not set in stone. Sometimes you have a little bit more to say in the opening and a little less to say in the closing. Or you have time to do a little bit more because you don't have as much to say in the body. But as a general guideline, this is a good way to start. Now, as for the body, it should be 60 to 80% of your speech, which would, for 7 minutes, would make it 4 to 5 minutes. And then for your closing, the same as the opening, 10 to 20%, 1 to 1.5 minutes. This is just a good guideline to aim for. Then we have the words per minute. How many words per minute should we speak? Well, 120 to 150 words per minute is recommended. I would encourage you to try to start out with at 130 words per minute and see how that works out. One of the things that can influence this timing for a speech is how much movement you do, how long that takes, how many pauses. So all these things contribute to using time. But I'm saying as a general, I've seen 130 words per minute work pretty fine. And also, I've seen several of the World Championship speeches averaged about 130 words per minute. Then here's a key. We have to write for speaking, not reading. Okay, because a lot of times people, they write out their speech and then they sound just like they wrote it. You don't want to do that. You write for the ear, not the eyes. So after you write something, you need to say it out loud and see how it sounds and make adjustments accordingly. You go, oh, I don't know, that doesn't really sound that good. Then you figure something a little different. But just keep doing that process, writing it, because the writing helps you to think, and then speaking it helps you to figure out how to make the changes so it really sounds good. Now we move on to our last food for thought. The rule of three. Now, the rule of three states that ideas presented in threes are more interesting, more enjoyable, and more memorable for your audience. It makes sense. See, the brain can usually handle three things pretty easily, but the more that is added, the progressively more difficult it becomes for people to remember. If you're using slides, you can get away with more, but as far as just speaking to people, they can only take so much in at a time. So that's pretty much what I wanted to share, but here's some things. You need to learn more about this. This was just an introduction. And so there's a lot more that could be said about these things. So I will send you a PDF with links to articles to learn more about what we looked at today. And you use them as you want. It's up to you if you want to learn. So there's links there on opening the speech, closing the speech, and the body of the speech. So those could help you to learn more. Now here's what you need to do. Here's your call to action. When you get ready to write your speech, send me the opening and closing first, but after you use Grammarly to check them. Then I will give you my feedback on how to improve them, and then send them back to you, and you can do that and send it back and forth. We can go back and forth until we're both satisfied that you have the best quality you can have. Then after that, then you can work on the body of the speech and repeat this process I just mentioned. We're at the end of what I wanted to share with you with this training. So as usual, let's finish our time with some Q&A. All right, turn on that mic. Okay, some questions?
I'm thinking about questions, but sadly none pop into my head. But I have learned something about over the past weekend about conflict management, and I set it in practice like the other day. And now that I think about it, I can say that I structured what I said during that meeting a little bit chaotically. So how would you propose to get a start? Where to start from? What to think about first before you go to write the steps for the speeches in the steps, or the steps in the speeches.
Okay, but where at? What do you mean? The writing of the speech itself, or what? Like
how to go about to structure this, to start the structure.
Okay, that's what you didn't see last week. The last one we did is
okay.
Writing, making the outline. Okay, the outline is what helps you to think of the ideas. Like for me, Some people, when they do the outlines, I mentioned this last week, some people, they write out long sentences for their outline. Me, I just put the phrase that captures the idea that I want to do. And I just put them down, and I'm thinking about it, I'm looking there, and then sometimes I'm switching them around, right? I'm moving them until I feel like I've got a good logical flow to the speech of what I want to accomplish. So look over, watch the video of that one and see if that will help you a little bit, okay?
Okay.
But I always have to do a outline first, because if I just start doing a speech, it just can go, I can go this way for a while, then this way for a while. It doesn't really help me to get things done. So for me, I've always found doing an outline really helps. Now, I know some people use those, like what they call mind maps or whatever, they move those around. But for me, since you're talking linearly, you know, you're going after one idea after another, an outline works very good for that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I use the mind map technique rather than outlining, because it gives me more freedom of movement.
Yeah, so
Just
whatever
my
works
idea.
best for you.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Anything else?
Nope.
Okay. Well, thanks for attending tonight. It's nice to have someone here to show up. And next time we'll we will look at the final phase of writing the speech, which is the transitions and fine-tuning the speech. So that will be next time. So until then, Auf Wiedersehen.
Auf Wiedersehen.